Welcome back Year 12s to this next video. As you can see from the heading, I'm going to cover hire purchase agreements. So we're going to run through what these are and some associated problems to do with hire purchase agreements. So a hire purchase agreement is, just say you walk into a shop and you maybe you haven't got a lot of money on you at the time, but there's something that you really need. It might be, say, a fridge or I don't know, maybe a television or something like that. Now, sometimes a shop will offer you a hire purchase agreement. So they will offer to have you pay a deposit, and then you can take the goods with you and start using the goods, and then start making regular repayments back to the vendor, back to the shop. Now, until you actually make the final repayment that has been agreed to within the hire purchase agreement, the goods aren't actually owned by you. So hence the name, it's hire purchase, because for the period where you're paying back that item, you are in essence hiring the item because you don't own it yet, but you are paying for it. After a certain number of repayments, after the agreed number of repayments, you own the goods after that point. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, we would just buy the item outright, wouldn't we? There'd be no point in just paying a deposit and then some weekly or monthly repayments. So what happens is, in essence, we have to pay a little bit extra for these, sometimes a lot extra, for these agreements. And the reason is we are charged interest. So you are charged interest on this agreement because you are not paying for the item outright. You are only paying for a portion of it, and that's the deposit before you leave. And then after that, you will pay interest on what you owe. So there's a few different formulas that we can look at. There are a few different ones only because you can be faced with loads of different information with these questions. Sometimes you might be given, say, the deposit and the repayment. Sometimes you might just be given the total amount that was paid, or sometimes you might be given, say, the cost price of the item and the interest that you need to pay. So I mean, really, you need to focus on the questions themselves, and don't just wildly choose a formula and try to use it. The selection of the formula that you must use is obviously dependent on what's been given to you. So first of all, let's have a look at finding the total amount paid. Now, just say the agreement said something like, all right, you need to pay a $100 deposit plus, I don't know, a year's worth of weekly repayments. So weekly repayments, so 52 in a year, of $10. The total amount, therefore, would be the deposit plus the repayments, 52 times 10. And then, obviously, that would be, total amount paid would be $620 altogether. So $520 from the repayments plus another $600 from the deposit. So that's one way of finding the total amount paid. Find your deposit. Sometimes you have to calculate the deposit because it might be a percentage of the purchase price of the item. Sometimes it's just given to you. So another thing to look at, you might be given, say, the cost price of an item. So you might say, okay, there's a ring, a diamond ring or something like that, and it's worth $800. And if you enter into a hire purchase agreement, you might have to pay, let's say, $300 interest. Therefore, the total amount paid would be $1,100. So that's just a couple of really brief examples of how I would calculate the total amount that you would pay on a certain in a hire purchase agreement. The other thing that we always need to focus on as well, generally in most of the questions you'll come across, is there'll be some element of interest here. So you might have to calculate it, or you might just need to use it within your calculations for a particular question. So to work out the interest, basically we're looking at what's the difference between whether you were to just buy the item normally, so that would be the cost price. If you would just walk into a shop and buy an item, how much would it cost you? We compare that We look at the difference between that and the total amount that you pay under the hire purchase agreement. So that's what I just calculated in the box above. So as an example, just say we take our one from before, which was $1,100, just before I calculated in my just example I made up, that you'd pay $1,100 in that hire purchase agreement, but the cost price, that was only $800. As you can see, the difference would be $300. The extra that you pay for entering into this agreement, that is the interest amount. Now, of course, if I extended this a little bit further, if I needed to find that total amount first, I could add deposit with repayments and then subtract the cost price. That's another way of looking at the interest. So just a reminder that interest is the extra you must pay. For the hire purchase agreement. So it will cost you more to take the goods home and then pay it back in installments, so just a little bit at a time. It is going to cost you a little bit more, and that extra that it costs you is called the interest. Now, what we can also do is look at the interest rate that's charged on these purchases, because sometimes it can be really, really high. And to do that, we need to know what the principal is. So we need to know how much is owing on this loan, because it is in essence a loan. You are actually, you're not paying for the full item, you're only paying for a little bit. So that bit that you're not paying for is in fact a loan. It's like they're just saying, okay, pay a little bit now and we'll sort of lend you the rest of it and you can pay that back to us. It's really important to remember with principal is that when you after you pay a deposit, so after you pay, say, $100 on something that was worth on cost price of $1,000. So cost price is $1,000, but you pay $100. It means you only owe $900 after that. When you walk out the door with that item, you are basically owing them $900. And this is what I've done here. I've said, all right, the principal, how much you owe, is actually $1,000 minus your deposit that you pay. It's really, really important that you remember this, that you are super, super careful when you are calculating your principal, because it is a really, really common error to just take the principal as the cost price. It's not the cost price because there is a deposit that's paid. So what is owing and what the interest will be calculated on is the principal, not the cost price. The final one I'll mention is that the amount of the repayment, this can sometimes be asked. So obviously we need to look at the total amount that you're going to pay after you walk out the door. And that's your principal. So don't forget cost price minus deposit plus any interest that you've got to pay. So once you take the item, this is what you owe. You owe the principal and you owe any interest that must be charged. Now if we divide that by the number of repayments, then we will get the amount of the repayment in total. So it is helpful to know 52 weeks in a year, 26 fortnights in a year. That comes in handy as well. You might like to jot that down. Finally, what we'll look at is a couple of different types of interest rates that we can look at. Generally, we just deal with the flat rate of interest, and that is the same one as in our simple interest formula. So if we look at the simple interest formula, this R value in here, that's a flat rate of interest. So it's looking at how much interest, or what's the rate for one principal amount, just that initial value of the loan or of the investment, or in this case, the principal is how much you owe when you walk out of the shop. So at the start of the hire purchase agreement. We'll look at another rate, another way that we can calculate the rate. This one's a little bit different. This is the effective rate, and this is sometimes called like the true indication or a better indication of how much, what as a percentage, how much interest are you actually charged. And the reason we want to look at that is because with a hire purchase agreement, the principal or the amount that you owe is actually reducing over time. So I'll look at that in a moment. We'll actually get to that later. So we'll start off with just a basic hire purchase question. And this is just using the flat rate of interest, so the simple interest. So what I've got here is a ring. It's priced at $1,800, so that's the cost price. Instead of paying the cost price, you can pay just $200 and then 24 equal monthly installments. So 24 months, where this is being paid off over 2 years, of $82. $82 a month for 2 years plus the $200. Let's first calculate how much interest is going to be paid here. Don't forget that interest, this is written above, but it's going to be your deposit plus your repayments. Deposit plus repayments minus the cost price. So this is the total amount that you pay, subtract what you should have paid if you'd just been able to buy it on the day. So this is $200 for the deposit plus 24 installments, so 24 months of $82. So $200 plus 24 times 82, and we'll subtract the cost price, which is $1,800. And what you'll find is we are charged $368. It's going to cost you an extra $368 to pay it off over the 2 years. Secondly, we're asked to find the flat rate of interest. So first of all, we've got the interest, that's $368. To be able to use my simple interest formula, remember I is equal to PRT over 100, I need the principal. Now don't forget, principal is cost price minus the deposit. I'm not including the deposit in the principal because the deposit is already paid. So I won't be charged interest on what I've already paid. I'm charged interest on what's left when I walk out the door, and that's what I owe, $1,600. The rate, I'm trying to find that, so I'll put a question mark. The time in years is 2 years. 24 months is 2 years. I is PRT over 100. I'm going to use solve here to get my rate, substitute the values that you have into the simple interest formula, and that's over 100. And you'll see that the rate of interest here is 11.5%. That's quite high, considerably high. So you charge a flat rate of 11.5% interest for over those 2 years. And remember, that is per annum. It did say that in the question, however. So that's our first example now of flat rate of interest using a hire purchase agreement. Let's have a look at a second example. This one's looking at a laptop computer, and laptop computers are a really popular one for hire purchase agreements. They come up in a lot of the example questions, you will see. Alright, so what we need to do is calculate the interest paid on this particular agreement. We've got a cost price here for the computer of $26.95. This is a 1/3 deposit, so that's saying 1/3 of the cost price. We have 130 weekly installments this time of $25.97. So let's now calculate the interest. Remember, the interest is equal to the deposit. I'm just going to write DEP, the deposit, plus repayments minus the cost price. just write it like that just because I will run out of room. The deposit is a third of $26.95. So $26.95 over 3. $2,695 over 3. Plus the repayments. Now there's 130 of them because it's 130 weeks. So 130 times $25.97. And we subtract the cost price, which is $26.95. Now what we get is 1579.433, etc. I'll just put a dot there to let you know it's recurring. Okay, so that is our interest paid. Next, we want to calculate the flat rate of interest. So like I did before, I need to use the simple interest formula, but of course, I need a few things here. I've got my interest, there it is up there. Principal. Remember, principal is cost price minus the deposit. Cost price was $2,695. Deposit, $2,695 divided by 3 or over 3. And we're left with 1796.666, etc. You can put a dot above to show that it's recurring, that number 6 is recurring. The reason I'm doing that is I'm not going to round off here and then use the rounded answer because then I lose accuracy. So we use the unrounded answer in our calculations. And on your calculator, you can just highlight it and press enter, and it will copy it down into your workings, into your calculator. So time, well, we've got 130 weeks. If we want that in years, that's 130 divided by 52 weeks in a year, and that is 2.5. I'll just move over to this opposite side, just put a dotted line to separate the page. At the moment, I'm just substituting into the rule. R is what I'm trying to find. And we solve for R. And you'll see this one is a huge amount of interest, 35.16%. You can see why it is a good idea to calculate the interest on these hire purchase agreements, because you can see that this is really large. It would probably be cheaper just to take out, say, a small personal loan, perhaps with a financial institution, rather than enter into this agreement. But if you are unaware, if you're vulnerable, if you're not capable of, say, calculating these rates yourself, you could be stuck in an agreement that is basically ripping you off in a way, because this is a really high interest rate. It's not what we want. So that is on the laptop, the $2,695 laptop. We are paying a huge amount of interest on that agreement. Okay, this third example, you'll see that we're going to be calculating a deposit. We'll calculate an interest amount as well. And finally, we'll look at how much you need to repay. Because you'll notice in this question, when you read it, that the amount repaid is not given to you, the fortnightly installments that they mention here. We don't know how much those fortnightly installments are going to be. So to start off with, we need to calculate the deposit, because you'll see here that it only gives us 10%. So 10% we must pay, and that's of the cost price, and that's $3,995. So 10%, $3,995 is $399.50. So that's how much deposit we must pay to buy this laptop. Now let's calculate the interest on that, because we don't know how much we don't know how much in total will be paid, so we can't use that to find our interest. But we do have here the interest rate. So what I'm going to do is use the simple interest formula to calculate the interest here. First of all though, what would the principal be? Remember, I keep saying it over and over again, but because I know there are so many errors made with the principal on hire purchase agreements that I really don't want you making that error. Principal is the cost price minus the deposit. Say it to yourself over and over again. The cost price minus the deposit is $3,995 minus $399.50. Oh, this isn't working for me very well. And we get 3,595.50. Let's work out the interest now. We've got the rate, that's up here in the question. The rate was 7.8 and we've got 2 years. 2 years of payments. So 3,595.5 times by the rate, again, I was about to say 5.3, 7.8 was this rate by 2 years. So therefore the interest, $560.90. So a considerable amount again for this laptop computer. The flat rate wasn't too bad compared to the other one, 7.8%, but it is a fair amount of money over those 2 years and on a principal that was much higher than the last one. The principal for this one was $3,500. The final question is asking us to find the amount that you need to repay. So recall from previous page, at the previous page where I took you through some of these formulas, that to get the amount of the repayment, I need to take the principal, so what's owed, and add the interest, and I need to divide that by the number of repayments. So I've got the principal and I've got the interest. How many repayments are there though? We've got 2 years and they're going to be done fortnightly. So there's 26 fortnights in a year. So therefore in 2 years there would be 52 fortnights. So let's calculate it now. The repayment would be the principal, 3,595.5, plus the interest, which is 560.90 over 52. And we come up with a fortnightly repayment of $79.93. So every fortnight, Amy needs to pay $79.93. It's quite a lot if you think about it. So it's nearly $80 a fortnight. It's nearly $40 a week. So imagine that, $40 a week for 2 years. And then she would finally have paid off that laptop. The final thing I want to do is look at the effective interest rate. So remember I said that's a true indication. It's a better indication of how much interest has actually been charged. Now the reason is when you calculate a flat rate of interest, you are calculating it on the original cost or the original principal really. So how much you owe at the start. Now in actual fact, the balance of the loan or the balance that you owe to the shopkeeper that's offered you this hire purchase agreement is actually decreasing because every time you make a payment, what you owe to them is much less. So what the effective rate of interest does is look at the average amount that you owe on the length of the loan. So over that length of the loan, how much do you owe on average? And then the formula will calculate the effective rate on that average amount. We use this formula here to calculate the effective rate, and we use R again for the rate, but we put a little subscript of E. So this one here, a flat rate, you'll see it's got an F next to it. So F for flat rate, E for effective rate. It's nice and easy. Now this part of the formula here, this is simply our simple interest formula, PRT over 100, rearranged to say, or to make R the subject. So this is our flat rate here, 100 times by the interest over P times T. Now, what we need to do is multiply by this. Now, N is the number of repayments or number of payments that are made in total. So you do need to calculate that as well. So let's have a look. There is another option, this one underneath, it's the same formula in essence, because remember I said this is your flat rate. So if I take the flat rate from there, you'll see that is what's in the following formula. This part here is exactly the same. So you just use that one there if you've got the flat rate, or you've been given the flat rate. Otherwise, you'll be calculating it, so you'll use the one above. Now, if you've got lots of payments, what actually happens is the effective rate can be approximated. So the effective rate, when there's loads of payments, so say above 50 payments, it's going to be roughly 2 times. It's going to be roughly double the flat rate. So in those cases, sometimes if you don't have enough information to calculate the effective rate exactly, what you would need to do is approximate it, and you can do that by doubling the flat rate. So you only really use this one if you've been given the bare minimum of information to calculate the effective rate. We'll get stuck into it so we can have a look at how they would compare. So to start off with, we have another hire purchase agreement. We've got cost price of $16.90. We've got deposit here. We've got 18 monthly payments. So you can see 18 months would be a year and a half. So already we can get our time value. Let's get the flat rate of interest. First of all, we need to know how much interest has been paid. And interest is deposit plus repayments minus cost price. This is $150, that's a $150 deposit, plus 18 installments of $95. Subtract $16.90. The interest paid is $170. To get the flat rate, we use the simple interest formula. The principal, that's $16.90 minus the deposit of $150. So that's $15.40. Let's substitute this into let's substitute the interest and the principal into the simple interest formula. Remember, 18 months, it's 1.5 years. If you're ever unsure of that, 18 months divided by 12 months in a year, and you'll get 1.5. Okay, we now need to solve. And I'll just round to 2 decimal places. 7.36. Let's compare that now to the effective rate. So the effective rate is equal to 100 times the interest over P times T multiplied by 2 times the number of payments over number of repayments plus 1. Let's get this information in and have a look at the difference. 100 by 170 principal was 1540 times by 1.5. Number of repayments, there were 18. Pop that into your calculator and what you will get is 13.94%. So the effective rate is telling us that the flat rate, yes, it was only 7.36, but if we looked at our principal over time, we could see that as we were paying back, so as we're paying back this $95 every month, the amount that we owe was actually reducing. So the amount of interest that we were paying was actually a lot higher because the principal was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, but the amount of interest we were paying was staying the same. Therefore, the effective rate of interest, you can see with this example, it wasn't quite double, but it's almost double. So it's almost 14, doubling 7.36, so to take us over 14, sorry. But as the number of payments increases, if we had a larger end value, what you'd find is this would be closer to double, which is why we can use that approximation sometimes. So there's just a few examples to get you started off with flat rate and effective rate, but obviously with the hire purchase agreements as well. I know sometimes they can be a little bit confusing, but just jot down the information that you have always. So cost price, make sure you're really clear what that is. Make sure you're clear what the deposit is, how many repayments are there. Calculate the interest, calculate the total amount that you need to pay. Whatever it is that you need to do step by step. And finally, if you need to look at the effective rate of interest, there's a few options for you there to work with. Of course, it just depends on what you have been given. There are some questions for you to have a go at, to have a practice with. There are a few there because you do need a lot of practice with this to get your head around the jargon, I guess, that they use, the language that they use, and to make sure that you are really, really understanding these agreements.